What if I told you that the story of England as you know it is merely a captivating fairy tale crafted by its victors? What if the true history of this island nation is not a tapestry of glorious victories and illustrious monarchs, but rather a relentless struggle for survival against the whims of fate? How did this tiny patch of land off the coast of Europe transform into an empire where the sun was said never to set? And why did a nation torn apart by bloody civil strife ultimately give rise to a parliamentary democracy that became a model for the world? Friends, be sure to subscribe to my Quiet History channel, and leave a comment of at least 7 words. This is necessary for the channel to function. Share this video with others if you think it's important. Thank you. Imagine a time when Victorian England, steeped in contradictions of opulence and poverty, birthed the greatest industrial revolution known to humankind. The England we recognize today emerged from the flames of conquest and blood-soaked battles. But this tale reaches far beyond mere warriors and kings. It is a narrative about the evolution of a people, their language, culture, and the foundational institutions that eventually laid the groundwork for the modern world. This is a story of how a small island stood resilient against massive empires and carved out its own unparalleled legacy. Long before William the Conqueror set foot on English soil, the land had experienced a series of dramatic transformations. For centuries prior to the Norman Conquest in 1066, Celtic tribes inhabited the island, leaving behind mysterious stone circles and pagan shrines. Their whispers are still echoed in the names of rivers and hills across Britain. In the misty dawns amidst the heather-clad moors, one can almost glimpse the silhouettes of druids in flowing white robes, gathering sacred mistletoe with golden sickles. The Romans arrived in 43 AD, bringing with them stone and order. They constructed straight roads through marshes and forests, built cities complete with baths and forums, and endeavored to civilize the wild Britons. Along the northern borders, the majestic wall of Emperor Hadrian rose, serving as a stone barrier of the Roman world, behind which lay the lands of the rebellious Picts and Scots. On cold winter nights, Roman legionaries peered into the darkness from the watchtowers of the wall, listening to the howling wind and distant cries of barbarian tribes. When Rome fell, Britain was left to fend for itself. The Saxons, Angles, and Jutes, Germanic tribes from across the sea, initially arrived as mercenaries before turning into conquerors. They brought with them new names, gods, and a new language that would lay the foundation for English. British kings retreated further westward, into the mountains of Wales and Cornwall, taking with them the legends of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. Then came the age of the Vikings. On their longships they sailed from the stormy seas, wielding axes and swords to plunder monasteries and burn villages. The ringing of bells, warning of impending raids, became a sound of terror for the Anglo-Saxons, while monks in their cells prayed fervently for deliverance from the fury of the Normans as they heard these ominous signals. Many Vikings chose not to leave. Instead, they settled in these new lands, bringing their customs and words that would shape the evolving English language. By the mid-11th century, England resembled a patchwork quilt of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, half Christian, half pagan, still retaining the memories of bygone eras in songs and sagas passed down through generations. King Edward the Confessor, a pious yet weak ruler, governed without a direct heir. His death in January of 1066 set off a chain of events that would irrevocably alter the fate of the island. Harold Godwinson, the most powerful Anglo-Saxon earl, crowned himself as King Harold II. Yet, his claim to the throne was contested by others, including the Norwegian King Harald Hardrada and William, Duke of Normandy, a distant cousin of Edward the Confessor. Legend has it that Harold had once sworn an oath to support William's claim to the English throne. Now, William branded him a perjurer and prepared for invasion. As autumn of 1066 approached, a northern wind carried the scent of imminent doom. Harold first had to defend against the Norwegian incursion, defeating them in the bloody Battle of Stamford Bridge. But scarcely had he celebrated his victory when news arrived of the Normans landing on the southern coast. With little rest and a dwindling army, Harold undertook a rapid march southward to confront this new threat. On the 14th of October, 1066, two armies met on the hill of Senlac near Hastings. The Anglo-Saxons stood shoulder to shoulder, forming their famous shield wall, a dense barrier of overlapping shields. The Normans charged on horseback, their knights clad in iron, while archers rained arrows upon the defenders. The battle raged throughout the day, and by evening an arrow struck King Harold in the eye. With his death, the Anglo-Saxon shield wall crumbled, and the Normans emerged victorious. Thus began a new chapter in England's history. William, now the Conqueror, entered London and was crowned at Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day of 1066. The Norman era had begun, and England would never be the same again. William brought with him a new system of governance and social organization, feudalism. Anglo-Saxon aristocrats were displaced, their lands confiscated and handed over to Norman barons. These new lords spoke Norman French and regarded the Anglo-Saxons as a conquered, inferior race. They erected massive stone castles throughout the land, not just as military fortifications but as symbols of their power. Picture an Anglo-Saxon peasant, having lived his entire life in a wooden village, witnessing for the first time the emergence of a stone fortress on a neighboring hill. The gray walls, towering battlements, and deep moats stood as stark representations of a new order, one of foreign and unyielding authority. The peasant now found himself obligated to pay tributes to a new lord who spoke an unfamiliar tongue and adhered to unknown laws. William the Conqueror was not only a warrior, but also a shrewd administrator. In 1086 he ordered the first comprehensive census of population and property in England's history, the famous Domesday Book. Special commissioners traveled the length and breadth of the country, recording who owned each parcel of land, how many peasants resided on it, the livestock present, mills, and other valuables. The name Domesday Book reflected the notion that, much like God's judgment, there was no evading or deceiving this census. The entries of this document, penned on parchment nearly 1,000 years ago, remain intact, providing us with a strikingly detailed account of life in medieval England. William understood that to govern a nation effectively, one must first comprehend its resources. For the first time in European history, a state undertook such a monumental effort to account for its holdings. During the Norman reign, the English language nearly vanished from official use. At court and in the castles of the nobility, people spoke Norman French, while Latin was used in churches. English lingered as the language of the common folk, whispering tales of a time when it was the tongue of rulers. Thus unfolded a new era in England, one marked not only by conquest, but also by the complexities of cultural evolution and the blending of identities that would shape the nation for centuries to come. What if I told you that a battle for power in the medieval ages led to the birth of modern legal rights? Imagine a king whose notorious temper resulted in the murder of an archbishop, or a prince whose legendary valor became folklore while draining his kingdom's treasury. How did a young boy ascend to the throne amidst chaos, only to face new threats and promise change? Welcome to the captivating saga of English history, where kings, barons, and brave knights shaped the future of a nation. In the heart of medieval England, a dynamic figure emerged, Henry II. He navigated the rugged landscapes of villages and market squares, where his dual heritage infused the English language with a plethora of French words. This linguistic evolution was influenced by Eleanor of Aquitaine, his estranged wife, who brought with her vast territories in southern France. Under Henry's reign, the Angevin Empire flourished, encompassing regions such as England, Normandy, Brittany, Maine, Anjou, Touraine, and Aquitaine, territories surpassing even those of the French king. Described by contemporaries as a man of average height, robust build, with auburn hair and energetic gray eyes, Henry was anything but idle. His relentless vigor saw him traversing his lands, inspecting fortresses, presiding over court sessions, and indulging in the thrill of the hunt. Legends spoke of his capacity to exhaust both his servants and horses, demanding they keep pace with his unyielding spirit. However, it was Henry's legal reforms that left an indelible mark on history. He enhanced the system of itinerant royal judges who traveled across the country adjudicating cases on behalf of the king. This initiative fostered consistency in legal practice and fortified royal authority at the local level. Additionally, Henry introduced a jury system comprised of ordinary citizens, sworn to testify on facts relevant to the cases. This system would eventually evolve into the modern jury trial we recognize today. Yet, amid these advancements, tension brewed between the crown and the church, epitomized in Henry's tumultuous relationship with Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Once close allies, Henry appointed Becket as Chancellor and later Archbishop. Things soured dramatically when Becket chose to defend ecclesiastical privileges against royal interference. As their conflict intensified, a moment of fury led Henry to exclaim, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" 4 knights, seizing upon these words, traveled to Canterbury and murdered Becket at the altar on the 29th of December, 1170. Blood spilled upon the cathedral floor, and news of this sacrilege reverberated throughout Europe. Becket was swiftly canonized, and his tomb in Canterbury Cathedral transformed into a pilgrimage site for the medieval faithful. In a dramatic act of penance, Henry publicly humbled himself, walking barefoot through the streets of Canterbury and allowing monks to whip him at Becket's shrine. This moment underscores the complex interplay between secular and spiritual authority in medieval England, where even a powerful king had to reckon with the church's influence. Henry's sons would further weave their own narratives into the tapestry of English history. Richard the Lionheart, who ascended the throne in 1189, embodied the archetype of a knight, brave, noble, and merciless towards his enemies. Much of his decade-long reign was spent far from England, engaged in the Third Crusade against Saladin or defending his French territories. Tales of Richard's courage became legendary. In the Holy Land, mothers frightened their unruly children with his name. Yet, the costs of maintaining his army and the ransom for his release from Austrian captivity drained the English treasury. To the English populace, Richard was more a mythic hero than a practical ruler, visiting his homeland only twice and reportedly speaking little to no English. In stark contrast, John Lackland, who took the throne after Richard's death in 1199, was a cunning and ruthless politician. Under John's rule, England lost much of its French holdings, a development that, in hindsight, proved beneficial, as it forced English kings to focus on governing their own territory. John's reign was marked by relentless strife with barons, the church, and neighboring states. His attempts to raise taxes to fund military ventures in France fostered discontent among the nobility. A dispute with the Pope led to an interdict, a ban on religious services in England, resulting in John's excommunication. The crisis reached its climax in 1215, when the barons revolted against him, compelling him to accept a document that limited royal power and guaranteed certain rights, a landmark agreement known as the Magna Carta. Sealed with the royal stamp on the meadows of Runnymede on the 15th of June, 1215, this document became a cornerstone of English constitutional history. Though initially designed to protect the interests of the barons, it enshrined principles that would become foundational to English law. No one could be imprisoned or deprived of property without due process. Justice was not to be bought or sold, and taxes could not be levied without the consent of the taxed. However, King John had no intention of adhering to the terms of the charter, and soon received a papal bull absolving him from his oath. Civil war erupted, with barons inviting the French Prince Louis to invade England. The Plantagenet dynasty seemed on the brink of disaster, until John's unexpected death in 1216 shifted the balance of power. The throne was passed to his 9-year-old son, Henry III, prompting many barons to switch allegiances to the rightful heir. Henry III ruled for 56 years, from 1216 to 1272, making him one of the longest reigning monarchs in English history. A devout man and a patron of the arts and architecture, his reign saw the reconstruction of Westminster Abbey in Gothic style. Yet, politically he was indecisive and weak, leading to renewed conflict with the barons. In 1258, the barons, led by Simon de Montfort, compelled Henry to accept the Oxford Provisions, which effectively transferred power to a council of barons. When Henry later reneged on his promises, civil war erupted again. In 1264, de Montfort triumphed over the royal forces at the Battle of Lewes, capturing the king and his son, Edward. De Montfort entered history not only for his military success, but for convening the first English Parliament in 1265, which included not just barons and church lords, but also representatives from towns and rural communities. This was a significant step in the evolution of representative governance in England. However, de Montfort's power was short-lived. Prince Edward escaped captivity and defeated the baronial army at the Battle of Evesham. De Montfort was killed in battle, his body desecrated by the victors. Upon Henry III's death in 1272, the throne passed to his son, Edward I, one of the most distinguished medieval kings of England. Tall and strong, with long legs that earned him the nickname Longshanks, Edward was a skilled warrior and an astute administrator. He conquered Wales, incorporating it into the English crown, and endeavored to subdue Scotland, a task that proved to be more formidable than anticipated. As the saga unfolds, England's medieval history reveals a complex interplay of ambition, power, and the relentless quest for authority, all of which continue to echo through the ages. What drove Edward I to reform English law? How did the triumphs and tragedies of the 100 Years' War shape the future of England? And what secrets lingered around the fate of Richard III and his young nephews? These questions delve into a tumultuous era that reshaped the English monarchy and ignited the flames of civil discord. Edward I, a formidable ruler, undertook significant legal reforms that laid the groundwork for modern British law. He adeptly codified and systematized English law, ensuring its accessibility and coherence. Alongside these judicial advancements, Edward reinforced the authority of Parliament, particularly regarding taxation. Under his reign, Parliament transformed into a regularly convened institution, composed of two houses, the House of Lords, with its barons and high-ranking clergy, and the House of Commons, representing the common people. This evolution marked a pivotal turn in England's political landscape. Amidst these developments, England faced a daunting challenge, the protracted conflict known as the 100 Years' War. This war, which ignited in the year 1337 and continued intermittently until 1453, pitted England against France. Edward III, claiming the French crown through his maternal lineage, his mother being the sister of the last Capetian king, sought to assert his royal rights. The initial stages of the war were marked by remarkable English victories, notably at the battles of Crécy in 1346 and Poitiers in 1356. Here, English archers, wielding their famed longbows, decimated the more numerous French knights, challenging the long-held belief in the invincibility of chivalry. The 100 Years' War also sowed the seeds of national identity in both England and France. The English language reclaimed its place in official discourse, gradually ousting French from legal and administrative usage. In 1362, Edward III mandated that court proceedings be conducted in English. This linguistic revival coincided with a flourishing of literature, as poets began to express their creativity in the vernacular. Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales emerged during this period, laying the foundation for a rich tradition of English literature. However, the war exacted a heavy toll on the English populace, leading to financial strain. The burden of taxation fell disproportionately on the shoulders of peasants and urban dwellers, breeding discontent. In 1381, the government introduced a new poll tax, igniting the spark that led to the largest peasant revolt in medieval England, spearheaded by the charismatic Wat Tyler. Thousands of peasants marched toward London, demanding the abolition of serfdom, reduced taxes, and punishment for corrupt officials. They stormed the capital, burning the Savoy Palace owned by the despised Duke of Lancaster and executing the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Lord Treasurer. In a remarkable display of bravery, the young King Richard II, only 14 years old, met with the rebels at Mile End and acquiesced to their demands. Yet, during a second encounter in Smithfield, Wat Tyler was slain by the Lord Mayor of London, and the uprising was swiftly crushed. The king's promises remained unfulfilled, but the insurrection signaled a seismic shift. English peasants were no longer submissive serfs willing to endure oppression without resistance. The reign of Richard II ended in tragedy. As he matured, he exhibited tyrannical tendencies, clashing with Parliament and pivotal barons. In 1399, his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, Duke of Lancaster, returned from exile, inciting rebellion and ultimately seizing the throne. Richard was imprisoned in Pontefract Castle, where he met a grim fate, likely at the hands of his captors. Henry IV, the first monarch from the House of Lancaster, faced his own challenges while consolidating power and quelling uprisings. His son, Henry V, reignited the conflict with France, achieving a monumental victory at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. In this clash, an exhausted English army, beleaguered by disease and a long campaign, confronted a vastly superior French force. The battlefield was a churned expanse of mud, rendering the heavily armored French knights vulnerable to the relentless volleys of English arrows. The English triumphed, capturing numerous noble prisoners who commanded exorbitant ransoms. The Treaty of Troyes in 1420 recognized Henry V as the heir to the French throne, and he married Catherine of Valois, daughter of the French king. It seemed that the long-held dream of English kings to unite the two crowns was within reach. However, in 1422, Henry V unexpectedly succumbed to dysentery, leaving the throne to his infant son, Henry VI. Henry VI's reign marked a critical juncture in the Hundred Years' War. The pious but indecisive young king witnessed the gradual loss of English territories in France, particularly with the emergence of Joan of Arc, who galvanized French resistance. By 1453, the English held only the port of Calais on French soil. Defeats in France, compounded by economic turmoil and a faltering central authority, set the stage for a new civil war in England, one that would be known as the Wars of the Roses. This violent conflict took its name from the heraldic symbols of the two rival branches of the Plantagenet dynasty, the red rose of the Lancasters and the white rose of the Yorks. The first skirmishes erupted in 1455 when Richard, Duke of York, asserted his claims to the throne, contending that his rights surpassed those of Henry VI. The nation became polarized, igniting a series of brutal battles, driven not only by the quest for power, but also by the necessity of survival. Defeated factions faced execution to prevent future retaliation, intensifying the bloodshed. After the Battle of Tewkesbury in 1471, Edward Lancaster, the sole surviving son of Henry VI, was slain, and Henry himself soon perished in the Tower of London, likely executed on the orders of the Yorkist king, Edward IV. Edward IV, son of Richard of York, emerged as the first Yorkist king. Tall, handsome, and charismatic, he won the adoration of the people, yet his reign was fraught with intrigue, not least from his younger brother Richard, Duke of Gloucester. When Edward IV died unexpectedly in 1483, leaving two young sons, Richard seized the opportunity to usurp the throne. He declared Edward IV's children illegitimate, imprisoning the 12-year-old Edward V and his younger brother Richard in the Tower, where they mysteriously vanished. Their fate remains one of the great enigmas of English history. The most widely accepted theory posits that they were murdered on the orders of their uncle, now King Richard III. Richard III's reign was brief and tumultuous. Many regarded him as a usurper and the murderer of his own nephews. In August of 1485, Henry Tudor, with distant claims to the throne through the Lancaster line, landed in Wales with a small army and marched toward London. The two forces clashed at the Battle of Bosworth Field on August 22nd. The outcome of the battle hinged on betrayal. When a crucial charge was needed, one of Richard's key supporters, Stanley, switched allegiance to Henry. Seeing the impending defeat, Richard launched a desperate attack on Henry, cutting through the guards and nearly reaching his rival. However, he was ultimately surrounded and slain. His body, stripped and tied to a horse, was paraded through Leicester, displayed to the public as a grim spectacle. The crown that had fallen from Richard's head during the battle was found in a hawthorn bush and placed upon Henry Tudor's head right there on the battlefield. Thus began a new era in English history, the Age of the Tudors. Henry VII, the first king from the Tudor dynasty, ruled with caution, striving to stabilize England after years of bloodshed and turmoil. His reign marked the dawn of a new chapter, setting the stage for future developments that would shape the course of English history for generations to come. What if I told you that a man notorious for executing two of his wives was once the king of a nation that emerged from the shadows of the Middle Ages, or that a queen, who never married, ruled during a time when Shakespeare's plays captivated audiences? These are the stories of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, pivotal figures whose reigns shaped the future of England. Henry VIII is often remembered as a calculating ruler who strengthened royal authority. He quelled the last Yorkist rebellions and filled the royal treasury. In a strategic move to unite the feuding houses of Lancaster and York, he married Elizabeth of York, the daughter of Edward IV, symbolically merging the red and white roses into a single royal lineage. Under Henry, England began to emerge from the medieval era, showing the first signs of what we now call the Renaissance. Trade flourished, especially with the Netherlands and Italy, and London was transforming into a significant European center. However, Henry's personal life was marked by tragedy and tyranny. His second wife, Anne Boleyn, gave birth to a daughter named Elizabeth, but failed to provide a male heir. Accused of adultery, she was executed by beheading. His third wife, Jane Seymour, finally bore him a son, Edward, but tragically died shortly after childbirth. Henry's fourth marriage to the German Princess Anne of Cleves was annulled when he deemed her unattractive. His fifth wife, the youthful Catherine Howard, was executed for infidelity, while the sixth, Catherine Parr, managed to survive him. By the end of his reign, Henry had morphed into a morbidly obese tyrant, suffering from the pains of a long-standing leg injury, and he passed away in January of 1547, leaving the throne to his 9-year-old son, Edward VI. Edward's short reign was characterized by the strengthening of Protestant influence in England. Raised in the Protestant faith, the young king supported further religious reforms, introducing a Book of Common Prayer in English, altering church interiors, and prohibiting the veneration of saints and relics. However, when Edward succumbed to tuberculosis in 1553, the crown passed to his older sister Mary, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon. Mary, a staunch Catholic, wasted no time restoring Catholicism in England. She returned the country under the spiritual authority of the Pope, reinstated the Catholic Mass, and began a brutal campaign against Protestants. Over the course of her 5-year reign, approximately 300 Protestants were executed, including Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury. These executions earned Mary the notorious nickname Bloody Mary, and sparked disgust even among many Catholics. Additionally, her marriage to Philip, the Spanish prince and future King Philip II of Spain, was met with widespread disapproval among the English, who feared foreign domination. After Mary's death in November of 1558, the throne was passed to her half-sister Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn. Thus began one of the most illustrious periods in English history, the Elizabethan era. Elizabeth I was an extraordinary individual and a keen political strategist. She inherited her father's decisiveness and intellect, along with her mother's charm and social grace. With an exceptional education, she was fluent in several languages, skilled at playing the lute, and had a talent for poetry. However, her most notable skill was her ability to manage people and broker compromises. In matters of religion, Elizabeth chose a middle path. She reinstated Protestantism but did so in a moderate manner, allowing for the continuation of many traditional practices. The Church of England under her rule became a compromise between Catholicism and radical Protestantism. Remarkably, Elizabeth never married, despite having countless suitors. She referred to herself as the Virgin Queen, betrothed to her country. This was no mere rhetorical flourish. A marriage to a foreign prince could lead to external control, while a union with an English subject could incite courtly intrigue and power struggles. Elizabeth's reign was a time of flourishing English culture. It was the age of Shakespeare, Marlowe, Spenser, and Bacon. The theaters of London, including the famous Globe, where Shakespeare's plays were performed, attracted thousands of spectators. Music, poetry, and painting thrived under the patronage of the Queen and her courtiers. Yet, the Elizabethan era was not without its challenges. England remained in a state of constant conflict with Catholic Spain, the superpower of the time. English sailors and pirates, such as Francis Drake and John Hawkins, launched assaults on Spanish ships and colonies in the New World. In 1588, King Philip II of Spain, the former husband of Mary Tudor, dispatched an enormous fleet against England known as the Spanish Armada. The Spanish intended to invade England and dethrone Elizabeth, installing a Catholic ruler in her place. However, the English fleet, commanded by Lord Howard of Effingham and Francis Drake, decisively defeated the Spanish in a series of naval battles. The swift and nimble English ships inflicted damage on the heavily armed Spanish galleons, and to add to their misfortune, a fierce storm completed the destruction of the Armada. This was a monumental victory that solidified England's status as a maritime power and Protestant state. Another constant threat to Elizabeth's reign was her cousin, Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots and former Queen of France. As a Catholic with claims to the English throne, Mary was a natural rallying point for Catholic conspirators. After being deposed in Scotland, she fled to England, seeking Elizabeth's protection. Instead, she found herself effectively under house arrest for 18 years in various English castles. Eventually implicated in the Babington plot to assassinate Elizabeth, Mary was executed after Elizabeth reluctantly signed her death warrant. Mary was beheaded on February 8, 1587, in Fotheringhay Castle. The final years of Elizabeth's rule were marred by economic troubles, Irish rebellions, and growing opposition in Parliament. As the Queen aged, the question of her successor remained unanswered. When Elizabeth died on March 24, 1603, without having named an heir, the crown passed to James VI of Scotland, the son of Mary Stuart, who became James I of England. This marked the beginning of the Stuart dynasty, uniting England and Scotland under a single monarch for the first time. James I was an educated man, having authored several books, including a treatise on witchcraft and a work on the divine right of kings. However, he struggled to grasp English traditions and institutions. His belief in royal authority as a divine right often clashed with the rising influence of Parliament. Under James, religious tensions escalated. Catholics were frustrated by the new king's failure to alleviate their plight, leading to the infamous Gunpowder Plot of 1605, an attempt to blow up Parliament along with the king. Conversely, Puritans, seeking further church reforms, viewed James as too conservative. When James's son, Charles I, ascended to the throne in 1625, the conflict with Parliament intensified. An advocate of high church Anglicanism, resembling Catholicism in its rituals, and absolute monarchy, Charles's marriage to a French Catholic princess, Henrietta Maria, heightened Puritan suspicions. In 1629, Charles dissolved Parliament and ruled without it for 11 years, a period known as his personal rule, during which he imposed unpopular taxes without parliamentary consent. Thus, the stage was set for a tumultuous chapter in English history, where the clash between monarchy and Parliament would lead to profound changes in the fabric of English governance. Did you ever wonder how a king's ambition could ignite a civil war, or how a mere act of rebellion changed the course of a nation forever? What drove Charles of Mears to summon a parliament that would ultimately challenge the very notion of absolute monarchy? And how did William of Orange turn the tide of history with just a single landing? The tale of England's tumultuous past is filled with drama, conflict, and revolutionary change. In the early 17th century, the tensions between the monarchy and Parliament were reaching a boiling point. Charles III, in his quest to impose Anglican liturgy on Presbyterian Scotland, ignited fierce resistance among the Scots, leading to their uprising. Faced with the pressing need for funds to quell this insurrection, Charles reluctantly called for the Parliament in 1640, a move that would come to haunt him. Known as the Long Parliament, this assembly quickly turned the tables, launching a campaign to limit royal authority and scrutinize the king's advisers. The atmosphere was charged, and by 1642, civil war erupted between the king's supporters, dubbed Cavaliers, and the parliamentarians known as Roundheads. This conflict was more than just a struggle for power. It represented a profound ideological clash over the future of England, absolute monarchy versus constitutional governance. The war dragged on, leading to a dramatic shift in the power dynamics. In 1658, Charles I's son, Richard, inherited the title of Lord Protector, but he lacked the charisma and authority of his father. The political landscape began to crumble, prompting General Monk, commanding the English army in Scotland, to reconsider the monarchy's restoration. In 1660, Charles II, the exiled son of the executed king, returned to London to a jubilant reception from a populace weary of Puritan austerity. His reign, known as the Restoration, was a vibrant reaction against the strictness of the previous Puritan era. Theaters reopened, court life thrived, and Charles brought a touch of French elegance to the English court, famously indulging in numerous romances and fathering several illegitimate children. Yet beneath the glitz of restoration lay significant challenges. The religious strife that had fueled earlier conflicts did not simply disappear. Charles, who harbored sympathies for Catholics, found himself compelled to enact a series of anti-Catholic laws, including the Test Act, which required all public officials to renounce Catholic doctrines. The year 1665 witnessed a devastating plague sweeping through London, taking nearly 100,000 lives, followed by the Great Fire of London in the subsequent year, which razed much of the city to the ground. Many viewed these calamities as divine retribution for the moral failings of the Restoration. The rebuilding of London after the fire presented an opportunity for architectural renewal. Under the guidance of architect Christopher Wren, numerous new churches emerged, including the majestic St. Paul's Cathedral, which became a symbol of the city's Renaissance. This period also saw the emergence of two distinct political factions, the Tories, who championed a strong monarchy in the Anglican Church, and the Whigs, advocating for limited royal power and religious tolerance. Originally, these names were derogatory terms derived from Irish and Scottish vernacular, but they became fundamental to the political discourse of the time. When Charles II passed away in 1685, his brother James, Duke of York, ascended the throne as James II. An open Catholic, James's reign sparked immediate concern among the Protestant majority. He appointed Catholics to high office, suspended laws against them, and maintained a standing army, which was perceived as a direct threat to the liberties of his subjects. The birth of his son, with his second wife, a Catholic princess named Mary of Modena, raised the specter of a Catholic dynasty, pushing Protestant factions to their breaking point. In response, 7 influential politicians from both parties extended an invitation to William of Orange, the Dutch stadtholder and husband of Mary, James's Protestant daughter from his first marriage. They urged him to intervene. In November 1688, William landed in England with a Dutch army. Abandoned by most of his supporters, James fled to France. This monumental event, known as the Glorious Revolution, transpired with minimal bloodshed and led Parliament to declare the throne vacant, offering it to William and Mary as joint sovereigns. But before they could be crowned, Parliament enacted the Bill of Rights, a landmark document that curtailed royal authority and secured parliamentary rights. Henceforth, monarchs could no longer suspend laws, levy taxes, or maintain a standing army without parliamentary consent, and it became illegal for Catholics to occupy the English throne. The Glorious Revolution effectively concluded a prolonged period of religious and political upheaval, establishing a constitutional monarchy where the king's power was constrained by law and parliament. Following the death of Mary in 1694 and William in 1602, the crown passed to Anne, the younger daughter of James II. Her reign was marked by significant events. The War of Spanish Succession, during which the English army, led by the Duke of Marlborough, achieved remarkable victories against the French, and the Act of Union in 1707, which united England and Scotland into a single kingdom of Great Britain. Queen Anne experienced a tumultuous personal life, enduring 17 pregnancies, none of which resulted in a surviving heir. Her death in 1714 marked the end of the Stuart dynasty, ushering in the Hanoverian line, with George, Elector of Hanover, a great-grandson of James III through his mother, ascending the throne. Thus began the Hanoverian dynasty, which would rule Britain until the early 20th century. George III, who spoke little English and spent much of his reign in Germany, inadvertently strengthened the roles of the cabinet and prime minister. Sir Robert Walpole, who held the position of First Lord of the Treasury from 1721 to 1742, is often regarded as the first true prime minister in British history. The 18th century brought relative stability and prosperity to Britain. The nation engaged in a series of wars against France, gradually solidifying its status as a leading colonial power. The rivalry in North America and India became particularly significant, with British forces ultimately prevailing. The 7 Years' War from 1756 to 1763 erupted into a global conflict, pitting Britain and Prussia against France, Austria, Russia, and Spain. The British Navy, commanded by Admirals Hawke and Boscawen, scored decisive victories over the French, while in India, forces of the East India Company, under the leadership of Robert Clive, defeated the French and their Indian allies, laying the groundwork for British India. The Treaty of Paris in 1763 awarded Britain significant territorial gains, including Canada, the eastern half of Louisiana, several Caribbean islands, Senegal in Africa, and a dominant position in India. This marked the pinnacle of the First British Empire, characterized by trade, maritime power, and colonies in North America and the Caribbean. However, soon the empire faced a serious crisis. London's attempts to introduce new taxes in the American colonies to offset the costs of their defense sparked significant resistance among the colonists, leading to the American Revolution. On July 4, 1776, 13 colonies declared their independence from Britain. The ensuing conflict lasted until 1783 and ended in a resounding defeat for Britain. The loss of the American colonies dealt a critical blow to British prestige, yet it did not impede the empire's growth. Britain's focus shifted towards India, Africa, and later Australia, giving rise to the Second British Empire. This period coincided with the onset of the Industrial Revolution, which transformed the British economy and society. Innovations such as James Watt's steam engine and Edmund Cartwright's mechanical loom revolutionized production, signaling a dramatic shift from manual labor. What happens when a nation's thirst for progress collides with the grim realities of social injustice? Can a single reformist movement rise against centuries of entrenched power, or will it dissolve into the shadows of history? How did William Pitt the Younger navigate through a storm of revolutionary fervor? And what role did Queen Victoria play in shaping a modern empire? The Industrial Revolution marked a seismic shift in Britain, transitioning labor from manual toil to mechanized production. The first factories sprang to life in the textile industry, nestled in the fertile valleys of Lancashire and Yorkshire. Here, water-powered mills transformed raw cotton into fabric, later giving way to steam power that drove production to unprecedented heights. As a result, Britain emerged as the workshop of the world, with cotton goods flooding global markets. Following the textile boom, the metallurgy industry also flourished, thanks in part to the innovative use of coke instead of charcoal for iron smelting, a breakthrough pioneered by Abraham Darby. This innovation propelled metal production to new levels, leading to the rapid proliferation of iron bridges, railways, and machinery. The transportation revolution began with an expansive network of canals, connecting key industrial hubs to ports, ultimately paving the way for the age of railways. In the year 1825, George Stephenson forged the first public railway between Stockton and Darlington, while his locomotive, the Rocket, triumphed in the renowned Rainhill trials. Yet, amidst the industrial advancements, British society was grappling with political stagnation. The land-owning aristocracy dominated Parliament, leaving burgeoning industrial cities without representation. As a response, a fervent movement for parliamentary reform gained momentum, fueled by the upheaval of the French Revolution in 1789, which ignited both admiration and trepidation among Britons. Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger, who held office from 1783 to 1801, sought to initiate moderate reforms, but was thwarted by the pervasive fear of revolutionary ideas. The threat posed by Napoleon Bonaparte's France further delayed these political changes, as Britain positioned itself as the bastion of resistance against French domination, forming and financing coalitions of European powers. Under the command of Admiral Nelson, the British fleet secured decisive victories against the Franco-Spanish Armada at Aboukir in 1798 and Trafalgar in 1805, establishing Britain's maritime supremacy. After Napoleon's eventual defeat at Waterloo in 1815, where British troops led by the Duke of Wellington played a pivotal role, Britain emerged from the Napoleonic Wars as a preeminent global power. Its navy ruled the seas, its industry faced no competition, and its financial system was the most sophisticated in the world. However, beneath this facade of strength, internal challenges loomed. The end of the war precipitated an economic downturn, leading to rising unemployment and escalating social unrest. The infamous Peterloo Massacre in 1819, where a peaceful demonstration for electoral reform in Manchester was violently suppressed by cavalry, resulted in the tragic loss of 15 lives and left hundreds injured. Despite these setbacks, the movement for parliamentary reform continued to gain traction. The year 1830 bore witness to a wave of revolutions sweeping across Europe, particularly in France, which reinvigorated reformists in Britain. Following intense political struggle, the first Reform Act was passed in 1832, rectifying some of the most egregious flaws in the electoral system. Rotten boroughs were abolished, industrial cities gained representation, and while property qualifications still limited suffrage, this marked a significant victory for the middle class. Unfortunately, workers remained disenfranchised, prompting the rise of the Chartist movement, which demanded universal male suffrage, secret ballots, the abolition of property qualifications for parliament members, equal electoral districts, annual parliamentary elections, and salaries for MPs. Although the Chartists did not achieve immediate success, their demands, except for annual elections, were eventually realized over time. In 1837, the young Queen Victoria ascended to the British throne at just 18 years of age. Her reign, which lasted 64 years, heralded an era of unprecedented prosperity for the British Empire, known as the Victorian Age. Unlike her predecessors from the Hanoverian dynasty, who were often embroiled in scandal, Victoria epitomized strict morality, familial values, and a strong sense of duty. Her marriage to Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha became a paragon of marital fidelity, and together they had 9 children, many of whom married into the royal families of Europe, earning Victoria the title of the Grandmother of Europe. Prince Albert, an educated man with progressive views, significantly influenced British society. He was the driving force behind the Great Exhibition of 1851, the first international industrial fair held in the specially constructed Crystal Palace in London. This event showcased Britain's industrial power and technological superiority, reinforcing its position as a global leader. The early Victorian period was marked by a flurry of reforms. In 1833, the first Factory Act was enacted, limiting child labor in textile mills. In 1834, the Poor Law was reformed, establishing workhouses where the needy received assistance in exchange for labor under harsh conditions, while the Mines Act of 1842 barred women and children under 10 from working underground. However, the 1840s brought new challenges. A catastrophic potato blight precipitated the Great Famine in Ireland, devastating the primary food source for Irish peasants. Approximately 1 million people succumbed to starvation and disease, while another million fled, primarily to the United States. This led to a nearly 25% decline in Ireland's population. The British government's adherence to laissez-faire economic principles, coupled with insufficient aid for the starving, bred enduring resentment in Ireland. By the mid-19th century, Britain had reached the zenith of its global influence, producing over half of the world's coal and cotton textiles and a third of all industrial goods. London emerged as the financial capital of the world, with the pound sterling recognized as the international reserve currency. Britain boasted the largest navy in history, safeguarding trade routes and projecting imperial power from Canada to Australia and from Gibraltar to Hong Kong. Adhering to a policy of splendid isolation, Britain avoided permanent alliances with other powers, intervening in European affairs solely to maintain a balance of power while aggressively expanding its empire, particularly in Africa and Asia. The Crimean War of 1853 to 1856, where Britain allied with France and the Ottoman Empire against Russia, exposed both the might and vulnerabilities of the British military. The courage of British soldiers in battles like Balaclava, renowned for the ill-fated charge of the Light Brigade, and Inkerman was overshadowed by the catastrophic logistics that led to greater losses from disease than enemy fire. The war marked a turning point, as reports from war correspondents, notably William Howard Russell of the Times, brought the grim realities of warfare into public consciousness, prompting reforms within the military establishment. In 1857, the Indian Rebellion erupted, a mutiny by Indian soldiers, or sepoys, in the service of the East India Company. While the uprising was brutally suppressed, it prompted significant changes in the governance of India. The East India Company was dissolved, and India came under direct control of the British Crown. In 1877, Queen Victoria was proclaimed Empress of India, highlighting the crucial importance of this jewel in the British imperial crown. The latter half of the 19th century was characterized by further democratization in Britain. The Second Reform Act of 1867 doubled the electorate by giving urban workers the right to vote, while the Third Reform Act of 1884 extended voting rights even further, setting the stage for a more inclusive political landscape. What if I told you that the fate of democracy in Britain was shaped by two contrasting political titans, Benjamin Disraeli and William Gladstone? How did their rivalries reflect the struggles of a nation grappling with the dark shadows of poverty, crime, and social injustice that lay beneath its polished surface? And what lessons can we learn from the triumphs and failures of this complex era in British history? In the heart of the Victorian era, the political landscape of Britain was dominated by two powerful parties: the Conservatives, known as the Tories, and the Liberals, once called the Whigs. At the forefront were Benjamin Disraeli and William Gladstone, each a representation of divergent political ideologies that would shape the future of the nation. Disraeli, a proponent of enlightened conservatism, fused imperial ambitions with social reform, becoming a favorite of Queen Victoria by appealing to her vision of a grand empire. Under his leadership, Britain acquired a controlling stake in the Suez Canal, annexed the Transvaal in South Africa, and famously declared Victoria as the Empress of India. This era marked a significant expansion of British influence across the globe, as the empire spread its wings, reaching new territories. In stark contrast, Gladstone, a deeply religious man, championed moral integrity and governance. He advocated for self-rule in Ireland and stood skeptical of imperial pursuits, emphasizing the importance of ethical leadership. His government introduced transformative reforms in education, civil service, and the military, while also engaging in passionate philosophical and religious debates. The scientific community flourished as well during this time, with luminaries like Michael Faraday and James Clerk Maxwell laying the groundwork for modern physics through their groundbreaking work on electromagnetism. Meanwhile, Joseph Lister revolutionized surgery with antiseptic methods, and Florence Nightingale redefined nursing, particularly through her tireless efforts during the Crimean War. Yet, despite this image of progress and innovation, the Victorian era was marked by stark social contrasts. Behind the veneer of respectability lay rampant poverty, child prostitution, alcoholism, and crime. The destitute neighborhoods of London, vividly illustrated by authors like Charles Dickens and Arthur Conan Doyle, coexisted uncomfortably with the prosperous West End. The chilling serial murders attributed to Jack the Ripper in 1888 shook society to its core, exposing the dark underbelly of the world's largest city. In response to these dire social conditions, various reform movements emerged. The Salvation Army, founded by William Booth in 1865, integrated evangelical Christianity with practical assistance for the poorest segments of society. Pioneers like Charles Booth and Seabohm Rowntree conducted the first systematic studies of poverty in London and York, establishing the foundations of modern sociology. Their research revealed that poverty was often a result of systemic issues rather than personal failings, challenging the prevailing Victorian notions of individual responsibility. The labor movement also began to gain traction during this tumultuous period. Initially confined to skilled workers, trade unions began to broaden their scope, embracing unskilled laborers as well. The Great Dock Strike of 1889 in London, led by Ben Tillett, showcased the newfound power of organized labor, signaling a shift in the balance of social dynamics. In 1881, Henry Hyndman founded the Social Democratic Federation, marking the emergence of the first Marxist organization in Britain. By 1900, the Independent Labour Party was formed, followed shortly by the Labour Party, which would eventually supplant the Liberal Party as the main opposition to the Conservatives. Women's rights also gained momentum as feminists like Barbara Beaudechon and Emily Davies campaigned for women's access to higher education and professional opportunities. In 1869, John Stuart Mill published his influential essay, The Subjection of Women, arguing for the necessity of gender equality. By the end of the century, the suffragette movement, led by Millicent Fawcett and later more radical figures like Emmeline and Christabel Pankhurst, began its campaign for women's right to vote, achieving full success only after the First World War. As the reign of Queen Victoria neared its conclusion, Britain faced new challenges. Its industrial supremacy was increasingly threatened, with the United States and Germany catching up and, in some sectors, surpassing it. While the empire continued to expand, particularly in Africa, during the scramble for Africa of the 1880s and 90s, maintaining control became increasingly difficult. The Boer War, from 1999 to 1902 in South Africa, underscored these challenges, as Britain faced fierce resistance from the Boers, descendants of Dutch settlers, who opposed British expansion. The British tactics of scorched earth and concentration camps drew international condemnation and sparked domestic controversy. The death of Queen Victoria in January 1901 symbolically marked the end of an era, paving the way for her son, Edward VII, to ascend the throne at the age of 59. His short reign, known as the Edwardian era, served as a transitional phase between the stability of the Victorian age and the upheavals of the 20th century. Often romanticized as a golden age or the last summer of the British Empire before the cataclysm of the First World War, this period was characterized by the luxurious lifestyle of the upper classes, vividly portrayed in popular series like Downton Abbey. Yet, beneath this glamorous facade lurked profound social issues and escalating international tensions. Europe was becoming increasingly divided into opposing alliances, with the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy facing off against the Triple Entente of France, Russia, and Britain. The naval arms race between Britain and Germany heightened the sense of urgency and foreboding. Imperialism, nationalism, and militarism brewed a volatile mix, setting the stage for conflict. When the First World War erupted in 1914, it not only brought the Edwardian era to a close, but also shattered the world as it had been known. The old Europe, which had dominated global affairs for centuries, was irrevocably changed. The once seemingly indomitable British Empire embarked on a slow path toward disintegration. Yet the fundamental institutions that emerged from England's history, the parliamentary democracy, the rule of law, and an independent judiciary, endured the test of time. They survived the empire and continue to shape the political culture not only of the United Kingdom, but also of many countries that were once part of the British Empire. The story of England, from the Norman Conquest to the Victorian era, is not merely a chronicle of kings and queens, wars and treaties. It is a narrative of nation building, of the formation of institutions, culture, and worldview. It recounts a gradual, often painful progression from medieval feudalism to modern democracy, from an agrarian society to an industrial powerhouse, from a small island kingdom to a global empire. Throughout this history are interwoven periods of greatness and decline, moments of national triumph and shame. Yet, through all these highs and lows, the thread of continuous development remains, a slow but steady evolution of society and its institutions. This ability to evolve without resorting to revolutionary upheaval, to enact change while preserving foundational elements, is perhaps the most significant legacy of English history. Today, as we gaze upon the world map, we see the fruits of this history in countless independent nations that were once part of the British Empire. We hear its echoes in the English language, which has become the global lingua franca of communication, science, technology, and culture. We observe its impact in political systems built upon the principles of parliamentary democracy and the rule of law, first established in England. Thus, The history of England, from the Norman Conquest to the Victorian era, is not merely a page in a textbook. It is a living legacy that continues to shape the world we inhabit today. When we look at the Palace of Westminster, where the British Parliament convenes, we see not just a neo-Gothic building erected in the 19th century, but a symbol of a political tradition that traces its roots back to the Magna Carta of 1215 and even further. As we read the plays of Shakespeare and the writings of great thinkers, we engage with the enduring legacy of a nation that has profoundly impacted the course of human history. What if I told you that the legacy of William Shakespeare extends far beyond his remarkable literary genius? How did a small island like England manage to shape the course of global history in ways that seem disproportionate to its size? As we delve into the intricate tapestry of English history, we find that it is a story woven from the threads of geography, chance, and human determination, resulting in outcomes that are not only unpredictable, but also profoundly significant. England, often regarded as a quaint isle at the edge of Europe, has been a crucible of cultural evolution for centuries. The historical narrative is rich and complex, marked by the rise and fall of empires, the clash of ideas, and the enduring quest for identity. This narrative is not just a tale of yesteryears. It is a living story that continues to unfold in the modern era of the 21st century. Today, as Britain navigates its post-imperial existence and redefines its role after exiting the European Union, the echoes of its past resonate louder than ever. The path ahead for Britain is uncertain, yet it will be shaped by the same pragmatism that has characterized English history throughout the last millennium. The delicate balance between upholding tradition and embracing innovation is a hallmark of this journey. It is this interplay of competition and collaboration that has defined the English experience, creating a society that is both resilient and adaptable. As we explore these historical dynamics, we uncover layers of meaning that help us understand not just where England has been, but also where it is headed. In this context, the history of England is not merely a record of past events. It serves as a crucial key to deciphering the present and contemplating the future. As we look at the complexities of its cultural heritage, we invite you to engage with us. Share your thoughts and suggest themes for future explorations in the comments below. If you find value in our discussions, consider subscribing to Quiet History and giving us a thumbs up. Join us as we continue to unravel the fascinating story of England and its indelible mark on the world stage.